Last time to Capitol tonight. With the budget apparently near completion and the census numbers now out, the battle over redistricting is beginning to heat back up. The census showed about a 2% increase in the state's overall population, but there were some big population losses in central and western New York. These numbers will help shape the new districts, and that is renewing calls for an independent redistricting panel, of course. This is an idea supported by Governor Cuomo and many Democrats, but Senate Republicans say it is not possible right now, and it will take an amendment to the state constitution to change the process. Now, joining me now to discuss the push for redistricting and the numbers themselves, which are causing a bit of a problem, is Queens State Senator Mike Gianaris. It's good to see you. How are you?
Thank you, Liz. It's good to be back.
So before we get to the process by which you will be redrawing the lines based on these numbers, the question now is that the numbers themselves are being, I don't know, questioned, right, by the mayor, and also that would be of New York City and by yourself.
I think we could say that if it wasn't such a serious issue, they'd be getting laughed at. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is for parts of New York City, my neighborhood, others in Queens, some in Brooklyn, where everybody who has anything to do with these neighborhoods knows they've been growing by leaps and bounds. Development is through the roof. Vacancies are basically zero, despite what the census will tell you. Immigrant populations are pouring into these neighborhoods, and yet the census is telling us that these parts of New York are actually seeing a significant decrease in population.
Okay, so before upstate viewers say, okay, well, big deal, it doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing, that, you know, before people start questioning this, it really matters because it's a cascading effect, correct? So if the numbers aren't right based on what's happening in New York City, then that means that the ripple effect going upstate in terms of redrawing lines has an impact. Is that right?
Yeah, it has an impact. First of all, you could start even before you get to that. It has a very direct impact on the number of representatives we have in Congress,
right.
Which would hurt the entire state, whether we have 27 or 28. I guess now we know we're going to have 27. And it has a lot to do with the funding formulas to determine how much federal aid we get in New York. And so if New York City ends up getting shortchanged, there's going to be a desire to see where that money comes from, and there's going to be, the demand is still there, in other words. And so it's a problem that everyone has to deal with. And unfortunately, New York as a whole now is going to get the short end of the stick from Washington because of these bad numbers.
Okay, so you have actually challenged them. You and the Queens delegation have all signed a letter to Senator Lieberman, and also over in the House you've also sent one. You're demanding an investigation.
Yeah, well, going back for decades now, there's been criticism of the Census Bureau for the way they count urban populations, especially areas where there are lots of immigrants, because they tend to be populations that don't answer the census questionnaire as frequently or don't answer their doors when someone's knocking on it as frequently. That's a criticism that's been going on for quite some time, and there's been controversy over whether they should go to a statistical sampling method or other ways of counting. Put that to the side for a second, because what we're seeing this year is something totally different. We're having that problem, which is a chronic one, and layered on top of that is just bureaucratic bungling that has led to a massive undercount of people that normally probably would answer these questionnaires.
Could we just, first of all, the Census Bureau, we should point out, is standing by their numbers, A. B, you're a Democrat criticizing a Democrat administration, and that's what we're talking about here. At one point, in other words, it was a partisan battle, that depending on who was in the White House, you could say, well, it's because, you know, Bush and he hates Democrats or whatever, but that's not the case in this instance. You're talking about a Democratic administration and a Democratic-led census. So that takes that off the table in terms of a criticism that's based out of politics.
Well, I'm not suggesting there's a motivation to this being purposeful, somehow malicious. I just think there was a complete incompetence on the part of the Census Bureau where they literally are miscounting people. They're claiming that the increase in vacancies in some of these neighborhoods are in the hundreds of percentage increase from 10 years ago, which we know if you just go and try and rent an apartment in some of these neighborhoods, you can't do it because all the apartments are full. So they're just wrong on the facts, and I think the mistake is so grievous that it borders on a scandal. We need to do something aside from the normal audit and appeal process that Mayor Bloomberg is pursuing to fix this, because it's going to have a very serious and real impact on people throughout the state.
Another potential problem, actually, that has arisen is that despite the fact that the state, when the Democrats were still in charge of the Senate, passed a bill, and then it was subsequently part of the budget, if I'm not mistaken, about counting prisoners where they last lived and not in the prisons where they are currently residing. The census didn't care what the state's law is, and they came by and counted prisoners in their prisons. So now you're going to have to go and back that out in order to figure out where those people are. It's one more wrinkle in an already complicated process of redrawing the lines. And if there's a lawsuit, I mean, are we going to be able to get the lines drawn on time?
Well, we're running out of time, and that's why many of us have put the pressure on, as you know, to resolve the redistricting issue as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the Republicans in the Senate are making pledges to support independent redistricting and then walking away from it the day after Election Day and ever since. And that's not just me saying that. You have Mayor Koch calling them out on a regular basis for that. But the prison change issue and the way the census is dealing with it was expected. We knew the census counts the prisoners where they are currently housed. But it's been done in other states as well, where you can back that out, like you said,
by
and count
hand.
them.
It's like 50,000 people that you have to back out by hand. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an already difficult enough process to try and figure it out. I mean, Jack McEnany was here with us last week when the numbers just came out, and he's obviously on the LAT4, the legislative arm, that's already moving ahead because you got to redraw. I mean, regardless of even if you reform the process, you got to get it started.
Yeah, and the sooner the better. And that's why what we really need is a resolution to this issue of how we're going to redistrict next year. Right now, we do not have that.
Well, I think the Senate Republicans think that you've resolved it.
Well, they could stand alone in thinking that, but Governor Cuomo has to sign off on whatever process is used at the end of the day, and he's been very firm in his conviction that we should have an independent process and that he will veto anything that's not independent.
Right, which means we're going to end up in court. We might as well just assume that's going to be the case now.
Well, or we can have a resolution. The governor's very effective in his first several months in office. He just got a budget through seemingly what we expect to be on time or even early. I don't put it past him to bring this to conclusion either.
So you think that the governor's going to be pressing for this before the end of the year?
Well, all I can tell you is the governor has been very upfront about his commitment. He made a pledge that he's well on the way to fulfilling. He introduced a bill that establishes an independent process that all of us that support that process are behind, including New York Uprising, the Good Government Advocates, and I would expect that he continue to be an advocate for that.
In other words, just because the budget got done doesn't mean that we will be bored in Albany. Okay, great.
Well, that's one of many issues we won't be bored about.
I know. I want to thank you very much, Mike Gianaris, for coming in.
Thank you, Liz.